Hey everyone. Again, I've had a student reach out that they needed some answers for questions for a death and dying class. And so I'm going to give some answers here. I'm Kari the Mortician, and let's get going with these questions for Brian. So the first question is, how has working at a funeral home affected your spiritual life and your religion? I think that there's times I dive in deeper to my spiritual beliefs and my Christian faith, and there's times that maybe I pull away from it even. I think that there's moments we question and think, just like everybody, like how can there be a loving God that maybe lets these things happen? How can this be okay if someone always has our back? So I think there's times that we question who is watching over us and what the motivation maybe is, just like any person who has faith. But then I think more so, I find myself diving into needing to be comforted by my faith. Where there's maybe days I just need to turn on music in the car, the worship music, and sing on my way home from work just to, I don't know, surround myself with the presence and clear my head and maybe fill up with goodness if it's been a day where we see some really bad things or some really heavy things or just anger and meanness, which we do see. So I think in a bigger picture, I maybe lean on my faith more to get me through some moments. I will pray before hard arrangements. I will pray before big funerals. I will just ask for the right words, ask for the right, actions and steps, and for God to just help me do and be who He needs me to be in that moment. So I think that without that, I don't know. I know there's people who don't have a huge belief and don't have a huge faith that work in the profession. And to me, I feel like I have a rock to lean on, where I don't know what maybe they have in some of those moments. But for me, definitely, I lean into it. Number 2, do you have a relationship with local churches? How many families have services with you versus at a church, and do you help them make that decision? Well, I'm going to talk pre-COVID, because right now during pandemic, with all the restrictions, we can't have services at the funeral home more than 10 people right now. So that really is greatly affecting the number of services and where they're happening. However, ignoring the pandemic and any other usual time, I would say maybe it depends on the funeral home too. Some areas you work in much more church-based areas where maybe there's a lot more churches, or especially like Catholic. The one area I worked in had 3 Catholic churches in just that town alone. And so if you're Catholic, you go to the church for your service. Whereas some folks may say, oh, we'll just stay here. Why go back and forth? It's not as important to go back to the church. So it really depends on the church and the faith and denomination that the person has, whether they want to go to the church or not. With memorial services, people will have those either, they'll have them anywhere, but more they will have those outside at a park or wherever they're going to have them, without the funeral home involved. So that becomes even broader of an answer when you don't have a casket involved. Funeral homes want to have good relationships with churches. We have to work hand in hand. If a church and a funeral home don't really get along or see eye to eye or kind of be combative with each other, you're only doing a disservice to the family. But you do encounter where both parties want to be in charge, and the church wants to tell the funeral home what to do, and the funeral home wants to tell the church what to do, and nobody wants to listen to the other. And you just create a really rough situation for everybody involved and for the family. So it's really good when good relationships are built and they're there in place. You do get some churches who dislike funeral homes in general, and they encourage their church members to go get a cremation. You don't need the funeral home, and then come to us and we'll help you with all the funeral. Like, they just want to cut out that part and that role that the funeral home plays because they don't see value in it, and they try to encourage their church members not to see value in it. So that's kind of hurtful when we are just trying to be members of the community and trying to help community members and play our part and our role within the community, and that somebody's trying to usurp that along the way. So that's kind of hurtful and it's hard. But churches and funeral homes will have Christmas memorial services together, and we'll sponsor bulletins at the church and do dinners together, and have a lot of really good community relationships. So there's some bad, there's some good, and there's some that's just kind of neutral when it comes to relationships. I always have liked trying to develop relationships with pastors, breakfast with pastor, lunch or coffee with pastor, get to know new pastors when they come into town, find out how they like things to run in their church, just to kind of get that information down. So it is a seamless interaction and teamwork when you do have a funeral within the church. Number 3, how long do you leave a body before it is cremated? So this is a hugely broad question. When we bring somebody into our care, we try and meet with the family later that day or the next day. From that point, then we know our timeline and our directive in terms of when the visitation may be, when the service, if we need to line up burial or cremation. And so then we have to lay out our timeline. More and more now, though, people are delaying things out, not even pandemic. So we're ignoring the pandemic clause in all of this, but people are delaying things to try and, we're going to do it on a Saturday because more people can come, or, we're going to do it 2.5 weeks from now because that's when everybody can schedule to get into town, or, whatever the situation may be. So we are seeing that a lot more, that people are trying to make it convenient when death is never a convenient thing. And I always try to explain to people, you may wait for a Saturday, but Saturdays are already allocated to a lot of people. People have plans on Saturdays months out. They have kids' soccer games, they have graduations, they have weddings, they have travels and things already booked. So Saturdays are not always convenient for people. People might rather just come on Friday evening to the visitation or whatever evening for a visitation and not come to the funeral, especially on a Saturday. I've had families go, gosh, you were right. And I'm like, well, I do this for a living. I see this a lot. I know that it sounds logical when you think it and you say it, but it's not always true. And a lot of funeral homes are starting to charge more for Saturdays because they're such a hot commodity with families to wait and to, plan things on a Saturday. So that is also something to take into consideration. Now, that's for when it comes to like a full burial. Now, even with a memorial service, people may wait out months or weeks. When it comes to actually caring for that deceased and when they would be cremated or buried, we like to try and do burial within, 5-6 days. That's a good timeline of when we know the person's going to be in their prime for viewing, I guess, with embalming and everything. However, when it comes to cremation, we have to wait for permits. So like in our state, in Michigan, we have to get a doctor's signature and a medical examiner's signature prior to the cremation. It is a law that a doctor has to sign within 48 hours. However, doctors don't always do that. We've fought with a lot of doctors to get signatures, and a week and a half goes by and we still don't have a signature, and that deceased cannot be cremated until we have that doctor's signature. So doctors are not always very teamwork oriented when it comes to doing their part to help us care for the deceased. And so cremation can't take place until we get those signatures in place. And we work our hardest, but we get a lot of resistance sometimes, especially right now, pandemic included. If I have to call to get a doctor's appointment at my usual doctor, and it takes like usually one ring of the phone, I get my usual person. She says, hey, who needs to come in? I tell her, we book an appointment. Usually I can get in the same day for something and go. Well, now I call, it's 30 minutes plus on hold before I can even get a receptionist to answer, and then try to schedule, and it may be months before I get scheduled. So it's not a great system now. So in order to get doctors to sign, how many times are we waiting on hold 30 to 40 minutes just to get the receptionist to answer, to talk to them about faxing the death certificate over, let alone getting a doctor's signature back? So pandemic has made it a million times worse to try and get doctor signatures as well. So our optimum in Michigan, there's this, we like to have within 48 hours, somebody embalmed, cremated, or buried. However, we can't follow that rule right now. It's all out the window when we can't get doctors to sign for a week and a half sometimes. So the timeline is huge, or I mean that time range of when people are cared for is huge. Outside of cremation, what other things do you do to prepare the body for service? Thanks for your help. Well, what other things do you do to prepare the body for service? So if it's a public viewing, I mean, we would embalm, which includes bathing, injecting a fluid, aspirating, suturing up. We would then do hair, makeup, get them dressed, get them in the casket, set them up in the room that the family would be viewing in. Even for cremation, we would set features, closing eyes, closing mouth, brush their hair, clean them up, and dress them if they wanted them to be dressed. If not, they're in a hospital gown with a quilt or blanket, and then move them to the room for the immediate family to see them. So beyond that, there's not a lot. A majority of our care is really geared towards the living. A smaller percentage is actually for like hands-on with the deceased, really, especially with direct cremation as a service option. We really don't do much with the deceased aside from set up the functionality of, getting them here, getting them there, and getting them back from the crematory. So that has changed a lot of what we do. So thank you, Brian, for the questions. I'm always up for if you have questions and need things for school or for an assignment. It's going to turn into a video, guys, because that's what people want to know, more about what they don't know. You don't know what you don't know. So keep questions coming, and I will see you guys on the next video. Bye.